Victory of Lenin's programmatic principles at the Second Congress of the RSDLP. The Second Congress of the RSDLP opened on July 17, 1903 in Brussels. However, the Belgian police invited the delegates to leave the country. Then the Congress moved to London, where it continued its work until August 10. The Congress was attended by 43 delegates from 26 organizations. Each committee was free to send 2 delegates, but some sent 1 at a time. Therefore, 43 delegates had 51 casting votes. These votes were distributed as follows: Lenin's supporters had 24 votes, 9 Iskra followers followed Martov, 10 delegates took a vacillating position between Iskra and its opponents. Open opponents of Iskra had 8 votes. Consequently, the solid Iskraists did not have an absolute majority. It was this difficult situation that predetermined the bitter struggle at the Congress waged by Lenin and his supporters against the opportunist elements. On the agenda of the Congress there were 20 questions, of which the main ones were, the party program, party central authority, the seat of the Bund in the RSDLP, delegate reports, party organization, national question, economic struggle and professional movement, elections of the Central Committee and the editorial board of the central body of the party, elections of the party council and others. The most important task of the Congress was the adoption of the party program. The content of the program, its immediate requirements and the ultimate goal predetermined the organizational and tactical principles of the new type of party. A fierce struggle flared up when the program was discussed at the Congress. Each point of the program, Lenin said, was discussed and adopted separately. The Bundists prepared a desperate obstruction and almost 2/3 of the Congress, in time, was spent on the program. The Congress turned into an arena of struggle for the victory of the Iskra trend. Since the draft program was published long before the Second Party Congress, all its participants had the opportunity to study the text of the draft in detail, so the editors of Iskra refrained from nominating a speaker on this issue. Debates on the program were opened by the leaders of the anti-Iskra, opportunist part of the Congress, the worker Martinov, the Bundist Lieber, the Terry economist Akimov and others. Martinov delivered a lengthy pseudo-scientific essay, abundantly equipped with quotations from the programs of Western European social democratic parties. He needed all this in order to attack Lenin's famous thesis on bringing in consciousness from outside. The economists bowed before the spontaneity of the labor movement, ignored the role of the party, believed that the working class itself would develop a socialist consciousness without bringing it in from outside by the revolutionary bacillus, that is, the revolutionary intelligentsia. The economists belittled the significance of scientific socialism, the role of socialist consciousness in the labor movement, and denied the need to unite the labor movement with socialism. The economists were the agents of bourgeois ideology among the proletariat. The economists' speeches were directed against the theoretical part of the program, which spoke of the greatest role of revolutionary social democracy, called upon to organize the proletariat into an independent political party, to explain to the proletariat the irreconcilable opposition of the interests of the exploiters and the exploited, to prepare the proletariat for the impending social revolution. It is clear that this part of the program, directed against the ideology of economism, against the creeping empiricism of the admirers of spontaneity, did not suit Martinov and other opportunists. It was noted above that even in the pre-Congress period, there were disputes within the editorial board of Iskra about the social consequences of the development of capitalism. At Lenin's insistence, a clause was included in the theoretical part of the draft program, which said that industrial crises and periods of industrial stagnation, generated by the course of development of capitalism, further ruin small producers and further increase the dependence of wage labor on capital, even more fast to lead to a relative and absolute deterioration in the position of the working class. The opportunist Akimov and his supporters spoke out at the Congress against this point, against Marxist theory of the impoverishment of the working class. Akimov, literally repeating the arguments of the Western European reformists, said that the position of the working class in capitalist society not only does not deteriorate absolutely, but does not worsen even relatively. This frank revision of Marxism provoked objections from G.V. Plekhanov. If capitalism does not lead to a deterioration in the position of the working people, then why, Plekhanov asked, is the spirit of discontent and revolutionary mood growing ever wider among the working class? Why class contradictions are becoming more and more aggravated? Back in 1899, Lenin insisted that the famous words of Marx about the growth of poverty, oppression, enslavement, humiliation and exploitation of the proletariat should be written into the program of the RSDLP. Lenin defended the general theoretical part of the program at the Congress, and it was adopted without significant changes. The anti-Iskrists expressed their disagreement on a number of points in the draft program, but with particular force they attacked the inclusion of the demand for the dictatorship of the proletariat in the program. In putting forward and defending this demand, Lenin thereby emphasized the leading role of the working class in the revolution and the building of socialism, saw in it the main, leading force of modern society, around which all revolutionary elements unite. Putting forward and defending the demand for the dictatorship of the proletariat, Lenin restored the genuine revolutionary teaching of Marx and Engels, defended the most important question of Marxism, which had been consigned to oblivion by Western European and Russian opportunists. The draft program said, a necessary condition for this social revolution is the dictatorship of the proletariat, that is, the conquest by the proletariat of such political power that will allow it to suppress all resistance of the exploiters. In pursuit of the goal of disrupting the adoption of the main point of the program on the dictatorship of the proletariat, the representatives of the opportunist section of the Congress covered up their opportunism with formal considerations. They, for example, declared that the social democratic parties abroad did not have in their programs indications of the necessity of the dictatorship of the proletariat. The opportunists praised bourgeois democracy and opposed it to the dictatorship of the proletariat. The ideologist of economism Akimov was especially persistent in opposing Lenin's program provisions, who openly declared that his amendments were intended to change the very spirit of the program. The speeches of Akimov and Trotsky at the Second Congress showed the ideological kinship of economism with the left variety of Menshevism, with counter-revolutionary Trotskyism. Thus, supporting the economists, Judas Trotsky declared that the dictatorship of the proletariat would be possible only when the working class constituted the majority of the nation. Covering up his opportunism with left phrases, Trotsky postponed the task of conquering the dictatorship of the proletariat for a long and indefinite period. This suited the economists quite well. It is not without reason that in his brochure devoted to the results of the Second Congress of the RSDLP, Akimov fully agreed with the Trotskyist interpretation of the question of the dictatorship of the proletariat. Thus, there was a unity of views of all the enemies of revolutionary Marxism. This is not surprising. International social reformism covered up its betrayal of the cause of the socialist revolution by declaring premature proletarian revolution in any country if capitalism is not fully ripe in it, if the working class does not represent the majority of the population and if it has not prepared its organizational structures in the depths of the capitalist system. Technical and cultural personnel. In this anti-Marxist position of the Western Social Democrats and Russian Mensheviks, the essence of the counter-revolutionary scheme of Parvus, Trotsky, about permanent revolution was already laid. It followed from this scheme that if the proletarian revolution nevertheless took place in a country where the proletariat did not constitute the majority of the population, then without direct state assistance from the proletariat of other countries its defeat would become inevitable. The Trotskyist theory of permanent revolution hostile to Marxism-Leninism is not a simple underestimation of the revolutionary potential of the peasant movement. This is such an underestimation of the peasant movement, which leads to the rejection of Lenin's theory of the dictatorship of the proletariat. It is known that history has refuted all these Trotskyist prophecies, borrowed from the arsenal of Menshevism, international opportunism. Marxism-Leninism teaches, and the October Revolution confirms, that the seizure of power by the proletariat and the establishment of the dictatorship of the proletariat does not require the working class to constitute the majority of the nation. In a fierce struggle against the anti-Iskrists, Lenin and his supporters defended the main thesis of Marxism, the dictatorship of the proletariat. This point was included in the party program and adopted by the Congress, in spite of the united front of the enemies of Marxism. The clear and precise formula on the dictatorship of the proletariat, adopted by the Second Congress of the RSDLP, was of great importance for the success of the entire international labor movement and was a historic victory for Lenin's associates in their struggle against Russian and Western European opportunists. In his article on the history of the question of dictatorship, Lenin pointed out that the question of the dictatorship of the proletariat was raised in the program of the RSDLP precisely in connection with the struggle against Bernstein, against international opportunism. At the Congress, serious and prolonged disputes caused national and peasant issues, as well as the final part of the program, which spoke about the support of the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party of various opposition and revolutionary movements directed against Tsarism. In the debates at the Congress on the question of the dictatorship of the proletariat, on agrarian, peasant and national questions, the discussion was essentially about the fundamental problems of the revolutionary labor movement, about the hegemony of the working class, about the allies of the proletariat, about the political army, without which the assault on Tsarism and capitalism is impossible, in the conditions of Tsarist Russia, with its backward economic situation in the outskirts. The national problem meant mainly a peasant problem. The course and outcome of the struggle of the proletariat for the overthrow of Tsarism, the destruction of capitalism and the establishment of the dictatorship of the proletariat, which is a class alliance of the proletariat and the working masses of the peasantry, largely depended on its correct resolution, provided that the guiding force of this alliance is the proletariat. The draft program put forward the demand for the recognition of the right to self-determination for all nations that are part of the state. The great dialectician and strategist of the class struggle, Lenin taught that when solving this question it is necessary to proceed from concrete historical conditions and, above all, to take into account the class interests of the proletariat. Lenin and his supporters fought on two fronts on the national question, against the leftist ignorance of the national question and against the nationalist federal principle of the Bund. Bundists and Polish Social Democrats objected to being included in the program of the item on the right of nations to self-determination. This was a position of renunciation of proletarian internationalism, a position that would turn the working class of the ruling nation into an accomplice of national oppression. The Bundists opposed the notorious cultural national autonomy to a clear demand for the right of nations to self-determination, and demanded that schools be removed from the state and transferred to a kind of national Sejms. Putting forward the bourgeois slogan of national culture, national cultural autonomy, the Bundists were guided not by the Russian proletariat, but by the Jewish bourgeois intelligentsia and thus substituted bourgeois nationalism for proletarian internationalism. Lenin dealt a decisive blow to this nationalist position. The Congress rejected the proposals of the Bundists on the national question. The program approved by the Congress contains the following requirements: the right to self-determination for all nations that are part of the state, the right of the population to receive education in their native language, complete equality of citizens regardless of gender, religion, race and nationality, etc. On the basis of these requirements, our party educated the working class of Russia in the spirit of proletarian internationalism, rallied the working masses of oppressed nationalities around the Russian proletariat to fight against autocracy and capitalist slavery, for socialism. The rallying of all the peoples of the Soviet Union into a single and friendly family was the most important condition for the world historic victories won by Soviet society. Friendship of the peoples of the USSR is the basis of a multinational socialist state. The friendship of peoples, welded in many years of struggle and building a communist society, has been, is and will be indestructible. The party will not allow anyone to undermine the friendship of the Soviet peoples. The points formulated by Lenin on the agrarian peasant question provoked fierce attacks from all anti-Iskroists and unstable Iskroists. The future leaders of Russian Menshevism developed anti-Marxist views of the peasantry, expressed by them even before the Congress. The hostile attitude towards the peasantry was clearly expressed by Lieber, who declared that if the remnants of serfdom were to be abolished, it was the business of the social democracy, not the peasants. The opportunist Markov went even further. When discussing the final part of the program, he declared that in Russia only the proletariat is a revolutionary class, and the other classes want only to enjoy the fruits of the revolution. Markov stressed that he was against supporting the demands of the peasantry. At the Congress, the opportunists rejected Lenin's demand for the return of the cut-offs, as well as his entire agrarian program. Dogmatically asserting that the forthcoming Russian Revolution will have all the features of the past bourgeois revolutions in the West, the opportunists considered the bourgeoisie to be the main driving force of this revolution. Thus, they denied the necessity of an alliance between the working class and the peasantry. The anti-Iskroists insisted that there were no remnants of serfdom in the Russian countryside, and, proceeding from this incorrect assumption, they ignored the revolutionary role of the peasantry in the coming revolution, its ability, under the leadership of the proletariat, to fight against Tsarism. Moreover, the opportunists viewed the peasantry as the main support of the Tsarist autocracy, as a reactionary force. Proceeding from these false and harmful assertions, the opportunists objected to the inclusion of demands on the agrarian question in the party program. Thus, they demonstrated a lack of understanding of the driving forces of the bourgeois democratic revolution, showed their negative attitude towards the need for an alliance of the working class with the peasantry, That is, they did not care about the allies of the proletariat in the coming revolution, which they did not strive for. The anti-Iskroists expressed their fear that the implementation of Lenin's demand for the return of the cut-offs during the revolution could lead to the nationalization of the entire land, which was so feared by the opportunists, who considered the nationalization of the land to be a reactionary measure. Lenin spoke out 12 times in defense of the agrarian program, against its opponents. In the course of the debate, Lenin introduced an important amendment to the motivational part of the draft of the agrarian part of the program. In the draft it was written, in order to eliminate the remnants of the serfdom, with heavy oppression lying on the peasants, and in the interests of the free development of the class struggle in the countryside, the party will strive, on the return of the cut-off areas, etc. Lenin suggested that instead of the words the party will strive to write down, the party demands first of all. This amendment, adopted by the Congress, had a profound meaning. It did not tie the hands of the party only by demanding the return of the cut-offs, but opened up the possibility of moving on, that is, demanding the nationalization of the entire land. Lieber and Markov proposed to the Congress not to accept the agrarian program. They introduced a draft resolution stating that the Second Congress of the RSDLP was working out a number of general principles of thesis about its attitude to the agrarian question in Russia, while refusing to formulate specific requirements in detail. Lieber and Markov's proposal was rejected by 38 votes to 9. The Congress approved the agrarian part of the program developed by V.I. Lenin. Putting forward the task of the struggle for the victory of the dictatorship of the proletariat, Lenin emphasized the enormous importance of the revolutionary struggle of the peasantry as an ally of the working class and achieved the inclusion of revolutionary democratic demands on the peasant question in the party program. At the Third Party Congress, the demand for the return of the pieces to the peasantry was replaced by the demand for the confiscation of all landlords' land. Lenin put forward the idea of confiscating the landlord's land and nationalizing the entire land even in his first works. An analysis of the struggle at the Second Party Congress on the peasant question shows that for Lenin the abolition of the remnants of serfdom is not an end in itself, but only a necessary step, a necessary stage on the path to the conquest of state power by the proletariat. Lenin viewed the bourgeois democratic and socialist revolution as two links in the same chain. From the revolutionary democratic dictatorship of the proletariat and the peasantry to the socialist revolution and the dictatorship of the proletariat, such is Lenin's line, which found its concrete expression in his position in developing the program of the RSDLP. At the Fourth Congress of the RSDLP in 1906, Lenin defended the nationalization of the land, which he considered possible only with the victory of the revolution, only after the overthrow of Tsarism. In this case, the nationalization of the land facilitated the transition to the socialist revolution for the proletariat in alliance with the rural poor. The nationalization of the land required the gratuitous taking away of all landowners' land in favor of the peasants. The Bolshevik agrarian program called the peasants to revolution against the Tsar and the landlords. The Second Congress of the RSDLP adopted a draft party program developed by Iskra. Although the party program was accepted by all the delegates, this did not mean the ideological unity of the Congress participants. The Congress unanimously approved the program under the influence of Lenin's irresistible logic, his passionate defense of the principles of Marxism, and the scientific substantiation of the most important provisions of the program. The lack of ideological unity among the delegates was especially evident at the Congress when discussing organizational and tactical issues. The programmatic principles of the Marxist Party are inextricably linked with organizational and tactical principles. Therefore, opportunism on programmatic issues inevitably led the anti-Iskroists to opportunism on organizational and tactical issues. The victory of Lenin's programmatic principles at the Congress, the creation of a Marxist party showed that in the person of Lenin, the Russian and international proletariat has a great theoretician of Marxism, a successor to the work and teachings of Marx and Engels.